Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/thestateofperfectbalance and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title for free and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audible.com/thestateofperfectbalance and get started today. The State of Perfect Balance looks at solved and unsolved murders from the smallest towns across Ohio. We appreciate every one of our subscribers and read your feedback faithfully. If you feel that what we do is worth a couple dollars each month, please consider becoming a supporter. If each of you just gave 50 cents each month, we could finally get those groceries we keep talking about. Find out more on how to support us on Instagram, Facebook, and Podbean.
This podcast deals with true events of a violent and disturbing nature, intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
She was very strong-willed. She was strong. She was a very strong baby. She was talking a blue streak, and she didn't let anything get by her. She was just very aware, very alert, but the child never, ever, ever, ever slept the night through her entire life. Ever.
Hey guys, I'm your host Amanda, and this is The State of Perfect Balance. In part 1 of this episode, we heard Becky Reiser talk about the night of May 23, 2000, when her daughter Liz and Liz's best friend Brandy Hicks reluctantly agreed to give a ride to a man waiting outside a Hollywood video store in New Philadelphia, 27-year-old Matthew Vaca. Trying to do the Christian thing and help a person in need, the girls quickly found themselves in a dangerous situation, at gunpoint with a strange man in their car. Becky and her husband Jeff, learning that their daughter was missing, answered what they believed was a message from God and went to the hospital at 6 a.m. on May 24th to find police and highway patrol officers and sheriff deputies gathered in the emergency room. We talked about families who lose a loved one to murder, and that the experience is a dividing line. There's the time before the murder and the time after, and life is never the same in the space after that line. It was in those minutes before hearing a supernatural call to come to the hospital at 6 a.m. and making the trip there that we find Becky Reiser suspended on the edge of that line. A police officer had been to her home in the wee hours of the morning, flooding the entryway of the otherwise dark house in light, to tell her and her husband that their daughter was missing. They feared, but did not yet know, the worst. And in that space between innocence and agony, Becky's mind turned to the familiar as she and Jeff prepared to leave for Union Hospital in Dover. What should she wear?
I said, we should probably get dressed. There's good thought. And so I went upstairs, and the stupid thoughts women have when they go to their closets. Well, I didn't have a closet, I had a room. And this I don't have anything to wear kind of thought comes, but it's like, I don't know what to wear. What should I put on? What should I wear? And I knew I didn't want to wear anything that was my favorite. I don't know why I thought that, but I didn't.
Arriving at the hospital and surprising the officials who were there and had not yet notified them, a room was found where they could have some privacy.
And so I'm not thinking anything about it. I'm just following behind them and going in. And when they got to the door, they opened the door, and there were several people in this room. And, the policeman says, I'm sorry, we need to use this room. Could you please allow us to use this room? And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of rude. We can go somewhere else. So anyway, we walked in there, and I can still see this room. I can see the furniture. There was an orange love seat, that squeaky, butt-sprung orange furniture. And Jeff and I sat down there, and directly across from us was this other man that Bobby Everett had been with. And Bobby was on the right, and he knelt down kind of stooped down on the floor. And then over to the left were Dode and Katie sitting in chairs there. And what I didn't notice at the time was that there were 2 nurses that also came in that room. And one was over on one side of Jeff, and then one was by me.
Remember, no one had called the Reisers to tell them their daughter Liz had been found. After the police had let them know Liz was missing, Jeff, still in his underwear, picked up a Bible from the table in the living room and, sitting on the couch, began to read and pray.
It was just Jeff and I there, and we kind of looked at each other, and it was just surreal. It's like, huh? And Jeff said, we need to pray. And so he and I stood there and we prayed, and you have all these questions in your mind, and you're worrying, and you're thinking, where is she and what's she doing, and all this. And so I went over to the front windows. We had a big bay window, huge bay window, and I could see like 3 directions at this bay window. And Jeff went over and sat down on the couch. And I knew what he was doing because it was normal for him. His Bible had been laying open on the coffee table right in front of the couch. So when I heard those pages, that thin paper, it's a unique sound, and you know what it is because I just knew. And so he was sitting there and he was reading, and I'm standing at the window, and excuse me, I'm practicing this speech in my head, all the things that I'm going to say to Liz when she comes home. Because, she was granted special permission, and she was this and this and this, so, and she had never been a troublemaker. She was strong-willed, but she had never, ever been in trouble. And she was an excellent student and a good friend, and busy in all these youth groups and so on. And so, for her to blatantly do something like this was so out of character for her. But in my mind, I'm getting this speech already.
Now, in the hospital waiting room with the orange chairs, Becky Reiser heard someone screaming.
And I can remember looking at him and then hearing this horrible sound and thinking, what in the heck is that? And it was me screaming no from somewhere deep inside me that I didn't even know was there. And at that point in time, I can remember just falling against Jeff, sobbing, just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing.
She made a decision right there in the hospital waiting room to forgive, even though she did not yet know who she was forgiving or what had happened to her daughter, Liz.
It was almost like an out-of-body experience sitting there. I could feel Jeff, and he was crying, but yet not sobbing. But there was some talking going on. And as I was sitting there, somebody handed me this gorgeous, ornately wrapped gift. And I'm thinking, what is this about? And I'm looking at it thinking, oh, how beautiful this is, and kind of turning it around, looking at it. And I can remember looking up why did you give this to me? Not seeing anybody there. And then all of a sudden, this gift fell open. It's like all 4 sides came open. And in that box was forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand it kind of for a split second, but I knew that for me, that gift was life or death. Because if I accepted that forgiveness, and at the time I didn't know what that was for, accepting that forgiveness was life, rejecting it was death. And then I can remember hearing Jeff say, and we forgive the man that did this. And I can remember as all this is going on, it felt like somebody had a bottle of pancake syrup pouring it over me. And you know how pancake syrup just envelops and just slowly runs down. Well, that's what I felt like. And as I felt that, I just had a total peace. And I recognized then what was going on and what this was all about, this gift. And I remember sitting up and saying, yes, we forgive.
In a small town like Dover, people grow up together. They know each other. And Becky and Jeff knew many of the people in the room that night. Those people tried to break the news to them as gently as they could.
Knowing that Liz was dead, not knowing any of the circumstances, and Walt wasn't telling us anything, but he was asking questions. And he was asking me, he said, do you remember what Liz was wearing? And I'm like, and I told him about, I didn't know what she had on when she left the house, but, I knew what she was wearing to school that morning. And so he's like, well, did she have brown sandals? I said, oh, yeah, she wore those all the time. And he's asking me more questions, and I'm not really understanding why he's asking me these questions. It's not sinking in. I'm still sitting there crying, but, he names a few other things, and then he said, do you have a recent picture?
When a person in the family dies, there are numerous unexpected details to be worked out, and without much time to give them the thought they deserve. Not only did the Reiser family have to suddenly plan a funeral, there was the supremely difficult task of personally identifying their daughter's body.
I just remember walking into that room and seeing Liz laid out on this table. She was covered up with a white sheet, and in my heart of hearts, I really, really held out all hope that when we'd walk in there, that it wouldn't be Liz, that it would be somebody else. And when I walked in there, I saw her laying there. Reality really came crashing down. And I can remember walking up and seeing her, and I hit the ground. I hit the floor. And I can remember Jeff pulling the sheet up, because apparently I must have knocked it away from her wound. And the way they'd had it when we first went in there, you couldn't see her neck. But, and then I can remember somebody helping me up. And I can remember standing there just stroking her hair, because they had her hair kind of, up and over the table or the thing that her head was on. And she had a thing for her hair. She loved her hair, and she loved certain shampoos, and because they made her hair soft, and they did. So when I felt her hair, and it's like they didn't use the right shampoo because it didn't smell like Liz's shampoo. All these silly thoughts coming to my mind. But after we left there, and after that, the final blow, kind of realizing it really was her and seeing her dead. She was cold. She was hard. And I know that sounds silly, but Liz was always so warm, and she was, I've said this before, fluffy, and she was soft, and it just wasn't, that wasn't what was there. And I know it was just her shell, that she really wasn't there. She was with the Lord.
As details emerged from that night, the Reisers learned that Matthew Vaca had taken their daughter and her friend Brandy on a ride into the darkness, pulling out a gun when they told him they'd taken him as far as they dared. Remember, these were two high school girls who had gone out to enjoy a school activity before heading back home to watch a rented movie. They saw someone in distress and, likely against their better judgment, decided to do what they felt was the Christian thing. Vaca made them drive to a secluded spot near a field and went about separating the two girls.
And after they parked, he told Brandy to take off her shoes and to take her shoelaces out of her shoes. And she did that. And Liz had on sandals, so she didn't have shoes with shoestrings in. And he told Liz to tie Brandy's hands to the steering wheel with one of the shoestrings. So my understanding is she did that once. and he wasn't satisfied because it wasn't tight enough. So it had to be redone. I don't know if Liz redid it or if Matthew redid it. We're not sure of that.
In listening to Becky Reiser speak about her daughter's ordeal for several hours, I think the most wrenching moment came when she told me why she thought Liz had been picked out first to be killed.
Then he told Liz to get out of the car, and he had the other shoestring, and with that shoestring he tied Liz's hands behind her back.
Why, or have you asked yourself, why was Liz the one told to get out of the car first?
Because she was in the way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Brandy was this cute little petite blonde, and I'm sure he had many things in mind that he wanted to do with her. Mm-hmm. Liz, on the other hand, was not. And she was just baggage. And Matthew told us that as they walked up into this field, which it was a hay field right by this gas well, that he was asking Liz if she knew where she was and if she knew how to get back to town. And he actually told her how to get back to town. And, at some point in time, he said, something snapped in my brain. And he told Liz to get down on her knees, and her hands were still behind her back. And at that point in time, he pulled a knife out of the pocket of his hoodie that he had on, and it was a tile knife. So he took the knife and he slit her throat from ear to ear, and it was so deep it nearly severed her head. And she fell to the ground and bled out. He sliced open her spine, and he carved an X in the top and the bottom of this. Then he took the knife and he stabbed the top of her head. And he would have continued to do that, but the blade broke.
That's incredibly difficult to hear. Vaca drove Brandy back to New Philadelphia and ditched the car near the railroad tracks, which led back to Dover. Brandy, still in her bare feet, walked with Vaca for a few miles, picking her way over railroad ties and gravel. Oddly, he asked her about herself and her plans for the future. It was a revolting prelude for what he planned to do, as though he wanted to get to know this nice girl who would be his rape victim. He made her carry his bag containing the beer he had bought earlier.
After the man killed Liz, he went back to the car where Brandy was tied to the steering wheel. And he untied her, took her out, took her up into the field. And it's very, very late, probably 11, 12 o'clock by now. And he takes her up into this dark field, and she couldn't really see anything, but he took her close enough that she could see there was something on the ground. And she assumed that it was Liz, and from the fact that Liz was laying there not moving, she assumed that Liz was dead. Or if she wasn't dead, that she was at least going to not move, so nothing would happen to her. And then he kind of took her head and turned it to the side, and they walked back to the car. And, it was like a veiled threat. And so they started walking up toward the railroad tracks. Now, Brandy is in bare feet because he made her take her shoes off and her socks off. And so she's, picking her way across the road there and go up to the railroad tracks. So, they're walking down these railroad tracks towards Dover. And it's about 2 miles from where they parked to where they stopped. And, Brandy's carrying this bag with beer in it. And he's talking to her this whole time and asking her what she's going to do with her life and if she has plans and all this stuff, like it would just be a normal conversation. And, it's weird. It's like he just killed this one girl and now he's talking, it's just really odd. Supposedly, what he claimed, it was going to be a robbery. Yeah, because Brandy had some rings on, and so he took the rings. Now, Liz's purse was in the car, and it had money in it, and that was never touched. But he had more plans for Brandy than just taking her rings and her jewelry.
They arrived at a place where rail cars and engines were parked on the tracks, and he told her to get undressed.
They walked these 2 miles, and when they came to where Arizona Chemical is, I don't know if it's still called Arizona Chemical, but anyway, there's a bridge, but it doesn't have sides on it. It's a railroad trestle. And the railroad trestle has nothing under it. I don't know how they did it that night, but they walked clear across the tracks, or the trestle, and got to the other side. And on the other side, there were several train engines that were stopped. And when they got to one, he told Brandy, he says, get up on here. And she got up on there, and he said, okay, take your clothes off. And he attempted to rape her twice. He was unsuccessful. And so he got very, very angry. And he told her, he says, put your clothes back on. And he got down and was waiting for her. And as she got down off the railroad the engine, she puked there on the side of on the ground by the engine. And at that point in time, he came up behind her, and he had taken her jewelry. So he had her neck. Well, I guess she still had a necklace on, but he had the shoestring that he had on that she'd been tied with. And he wrapped it around her neck, and between her necklace and the shoestring, he was twisting it, and he tried to choke her. And he's, doing this and dragging her down the railroad tracks back towards the trestle. And, she's blacked out. I mean, he thought she was dead. Well, at one point in time, he still had it around her neck, and he whacked her back to knock the last of the air out of her lungs. And then he snapped her neck to break it, and then tried to throw her over the edge of the trestle into the river. And as he started to throw her over, somehow or other, her feet got tangled up in something. And she came to. She was not dead. And she opened her eyes, and she realized she was facing the river and knew immediately she had to take a big gulp of air. And so he got her feet untangled, and down she went the 30 feet into the water.
Remarkably, Brandy had the wherewithal to play dead in the cold waters of the Tuscarawas River.
When she surfaced, she grabbed hold of the stuff that was under there, and she didn't come up out. She just put her face out so she could breathe. So she is laying there in the water, and she can see up above, and he's up there on this trestle, and he's smoking cigarettes, and he's walking back and forth, and he's kicking stones into the water. And he stays there for quite some time, waiting to see if her body's going to surface. And when she was sure he was gone, she climbed up this riverbank, and underneath where you come out, I mean, it's very steep to get up to the, on top of the ground where she can walk. When he was trying to choke her, her tooth went through, like her chin here, so she was bleeding. Her eyes were bright red because that's what happened when he was trying to choke her. All the capillaries and so on broke in her eyes, so they were like fire engine red. Starts walking towards town because she's 3 blocks from the police station. So she starts walking into town, and a car starts to come up. She's trying to flag the car down. Well, the car doesn't stop. It just keeps going. And so she's still walking, and I'm sure she must have been a mess. Well, the people in that car, we found out, called 911 to report what was going on. And the Dover police were alerted, and Bobby Everett, who was police captain and on duty that night, he went to check this out. Well, in the meantime, another car came, and Brandy flagged this one down, and this man gave her a ride. Now, this man was an off-duty deputy sheriff who lived in Dover, but he was just getting off duty from working in Holmes County. So he took her immediately to the police station.
Police now knew they had a serious crime on their hands and a missing girl. It was then that an officer came to the home of the Reisers to ask if Liz was there. In part one of this story, after the police had left the house and Becky and Jeff were trying to process what was happening, Becky looked at the clock when she felt strongly that God had spoken to her husband about what they should do, and it was 4:57 a.m. Officers located the body of Liz Reiser at 4:57 a.m. Vaca, after leaving Brandy in the river and believing she was dead, walked the long distance home.
When Matthew left after throwing Brandy in the river, he walked home, which was probably a couple miles from where they were. And he walked in, and his brother-in-law was asleep there on the couch. And so he woke his brother-in-law up. And he said, "I want you to come with me. I want to show you something." And he's digging around in the closet and looking for a flashlight, and he couldn't find one. But he had a lighter, which happened to look like a gun. That's what he had with him. And so he took his wife's keys to her car and stole the car, and he threatened his brother-in-law that he'd kill him if he didn't go with him. This is the kind of man that he was. And so he took his brother-in-law and he drove out to where Liz's body was, because when he broke the knife, he left it there, and so he wanted to find the knife that had his fingerprints on it. And so they pulled in there, and he had told his brother-in-law that he'd killed somebody, and his brother-in-law didn't believe him, even though he had been threatened by his brother-in-law multiple times. When they pulled in, he saw Liz's body laying there.
The two men went to Walmart for a flashlight and back to the crime scene. They gathered Vaca's bloody clothes and the broken knife blade into a bag and threw them into the river. Vaca was arrested less than 24 hours after the abduction and murder. His mother, hearing the news reports of the crime, suspected her son was involved and turned him in.
Forgiveness is a choice. Mm-hmm. We have to choose whether we're going to forgive or whether we're not going to forgive. Mm-hmm. And when that gift was open on my lap and I chose forgiveness, I knew that it was there. And it was so palpable. You could touch it. I mean, it felt so real. And it'll soon be 19 years. That has never wavered. Mm-hmm. Now, don't get me wrong. There was anger there. But that doesn't mean he wasn't forgiven. Mm-hmm. We have never not forgiven him. It's been a journey, but it wasn't difficult. Because that was there and God was there. However, we have to tell you that he had to be punished.
The family left it up to the prosecutors whether to pursue the death penalty.
And so when the prosecutor came to us and she said, "Do you want to seek the death penalty?" we deferred to her.
Vaca pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and attempted rape. He was sentenced to 96.5 years in prison. At the sentencing hearing, prosecutor Amanda Spies Bornhorst really let him have it. "The death penalty does not provide the swift justice it was intended to," Bornhorst said. "Do I think you deserve to die for the crimes you've committed? Absolutely. In prison, you will be beaten, you will be brutally raped, you will lose every shred of dignity, not for an hour, as Liz and Brandy did, but for the rest of your life." Judge Edward O'Farrell also weighed in. "I'm convinced," he said, "that if you had had that knife in your possession on the railroad tracks, Brandy Hicks would be dead. I want to give you another opportunity to tell these people why." "I don't know myself why," Vaca replied, then broke down crying. Was it the drugs? Vaca could only nod and continued to weep. Was it the pornography? Was it the music? "No, I'm responsible for it," Vaca said. In a separate hearing, our friend, Judge Elizabeth Tamakis, revoked Vaca's probation for a 1996 conviction for grand theft and forgery, and sentenced him to an additional 22 and a half years. On appeal, this sentence was upheld. Way to go, Elizabeth. Vaca, most likely, will never be released.
There's just no words for what he did.
No.
And how, she was such a sweet girl. She would be the first one to want to help him or to babysit his kids. And he said he almost didn't do it because he thought about his own daughter, who was like 18 months old at the time. But then something snapped and he went ahead and followed through.
Brandy Hicks, now Brandy Williamson, has somehow moved on with her life. She is a successful photographer and still lives and works in the same area where she grew up. It is, after all, a nice little town. Becky wrote a book, Through My Tears, Awash in Forgiveness. It's available at Amazon.com. She and her husband speak publicly about their story and about their personal ministry of forgiveness. Elizabeth Reiser is forever frozen in time, a fresh-faced young woman who was nearing adulthood and her own life of teaching and having a family. She didn't get to move beyond that point, but her family, in the wake of her loss, found the strength and faith to forgive and to continue on with their own lives. In memory of Liz, and in respect for all involved, we're grateful to be able to share this extraordinary story with you. What do you miss most about her?
Oh. Her giggle. She had an infectious giggle and unique. I miss the way she ate chicken. And the meal that I would prepare for her favorite meal. Chicken, mashed potatoes, peas, and corn. We used to make a song out of it. And it's hard not to fix that on her birthday. I miss her Sunday afternoon movies. She and I used to go in her room, and she had this little TV and a little disc player, and we would watch movies, and she loved movies. So much, but those are just some of the things that I feel were taken from me. I wonder, what she'd be like at 36, what she'd be doing, where she'd be teaching, if she'd be married and have kids, because she desperately wanted kids. And she had planned her wedding. But I am honored to have been her mom for the 17 years that we had her. And despite the fact that we would butt heads more often than not, God healed our relationship. And I will be forever grateful.
Thank you for listening to Season 2, Episode 2 of The State of Perfect Balance. You can follow us on Instagram at The State of Perfect Balance Pod and Twitter at State Perfect. And remember, lock your doors. Evil lives everywhere. Not all small towns are safe.